Welcome to the Tom Matt Show. You are walking through the front door of the refirement zone. And now, your host, Tom Matt.
Last week, Brother Bill Matt was on the show for the first time ever. Meadowbrook Hall and Oakland University. He's the executive director of Meadowbrook Hall down in Southeast Michigan, high rent district of Oakland County. Very, very, very nice. If you're looking to do an event or a wedding or something like that, everybody, you're going to want to go check that one out. Meadowbrook Hall, Oakland University, huge place, great story. Bill gave the whole background, and we'll have him back again to talk more about all of the functions that they have down there, because that was the high altitude kind of historical perspective. All right, today I am so thrilled. I've got this show could go for 4 hours, as I've done with many of my other guests that are so smart. Dr. Donald Layman is our guest today, and Don is one of my new best friends. Professor Emeritus, Department of Food and Science, Human Nutrition at University of Illinois. That's Big Ten country. You know, we got to like Big Ten people. Served on the faculty at University of Illinois from 1977 to 2012. Dr. Layman earned his BS and MS degrees in chemistry at Illinois State University, which means, he's a really smart guy. And then he went on and got his doctorate in human nutrition and biochem at the University of Minnesota, another Big Ten institution. He's recognized for research about protein and amino acids for muscle health related to athletic performance, life in general, obesity, diabetes, cardiometabolic health. Dr. Layman is a nutrition consultant to the food industry and very active on social media. I've got notes coming out of my notes, probably way over prepared for this. And the This Is Your Life segment of this radio program. I don't know how much we're going to get done here, everybody, but I'm calling this one Metabolic Transformation, because that's the website I'm going to keep plugging for you. You've got to go to metabolictransformation.com, metabolictransformation.com, and check out what Dr. Layman has been doing, what he does, and how he can help you get better. I'm all about getting better, people. All right. Without much further ado, I'm going to welcome to the radio program for his first time, and certainly not going to be his last. Like I said, my new best friend, Dr. Donald Layman. Hey, Don, how are you, buddy?
I'm good, Tom. Thanks for that introduction. Wow. It's going to be hard to follow the introduction.
Well, I try my best to give the love to my guests. I so much respect what you've done, and I'm so happy to get you so quickly. I mean, you responded so quickly to my initial outreach, so I appreciate that. Let's do the This Is Your Life kind of thing. I've got my list of bullet points we talked about yesterday in our pre-show, but go ahead. Let's do your story. You got good 8 minutes in this segment. Go right ahead, please.
Okay. Well, that's always fun to sort of reflect on the serendipity of life. So I grew up in Northern Illinois, small farm, small town called Kewanee. But it, allowed me to grow up, we're dating myself. This is back in the 50s. So, I learned about animal growth. I learned about plant growth. I learned about whole food and nutrition and all of that. And, we ate very healthy and worked very hard, very physically active. And so that was sort of a great underpinning of values. While I was in school, none of my family had ever gone to college, so, the horizons weren't necessarily particularly big, but I knew I liked science. So as you mentioned, I went off to Illinois State University, which was close to home, and got 2 degrees in chemistry. The first one, I started out, I was convinced I was going to be a chemical engineer, because that's all I'd ever heard of growing up. I had no idea what it was, but it sounded good. And about 3 courses into math and to calculus, I realized I wasn't going to be an engineer.
Funny how that happens, huh, Don?
Yeah. And so I was studying chemistry. I always remember a story. I was in an inorganic chemistry class and not doing particularly well. And the professor and I were chatting one day, and he said, when you find what your mission in life is, what your goal is, it'll be easy. And this isn't it. So that told me I needed to look a little farther. And I got into biochemistry. And I met a professor by the name of Arlen Richardson who got me started studying protein synthesis and looking at aging and how the body repairs itself and replenishes. A lot of people think about, protein synthesis or protein growth as something for kids, but people don't recognize that the average adult needs to make 250 to 300 grams of new protein per day just to repair and replenish their body. And that's critical. And I sort of got into that. And, I was doing okay, again, thinking, no idea what the future held. And Dr. Richardson said, I think you should get a Ph.D. And I said, really? And he said, I'll set you up at the University of Minnesota where some people are studying protein metabolism. I said, really? And he said, okay. And so I went off to Minnesota. And next thing I knew, I had a PhD in nutrition. And I got associated with some folks there who were also studying muscle, which kind of sung to me because, I grew up with, animal growth, but I also grew up with athletics, playing any sport that I could get into. So I was interested in muscle. So this sort of became a marriage of nutrition health and muscle development and long-term health. And while I was at Minnesota, I kind of developed the fundamental belief that healthy nutrition is about two things, two tissues, keeping your brain healthy and your muscle healthy. If those two are healthy, you've got a really good shot at a long, healthy life. Everything else, we talk about heart disease and we talk about liver and we talk about diseases, but it's really about keeping the essential things healthy. And that sort of, set the framework, the groundwork that underpins everything I do, which frankly is a little different than what most normal nutritionists do. I sort of approach things differently.
Well, you came at this at a very interesting time in history. My guest today, everybody, is Dr. Donald Layman, probably the preeminent knowledge source for protein, and he's all over the place. I actually found and heard his interview with Dr. Peter Attia, and after reading his book and being a big fan of his for years and years now, was very compelled to reach out. And again, Don got right back to me, and we're going to talk about several things because with our 5-segment show, as everyone knows here, got to kind of break this down. We don't run this long, like 3-hour podcast, so we got to kind of compress this thing. But we're going to start when we come back, everybody, with the why protein is important. We're actually going to talk about one of Don's colleagues and very, very good friends, Dr. Gabrielle, is it Leon or Lyon? Lyon. Okay. We'll talk about her book a little bit and how I'm efforting to get that. But we're also going to talk about muscle-centric growth, weight loss, how much, the food matrix, meal distribution. We got a lot to cover here. Don, I got about 30 seconds. You want to set this up to while we go to break here and talk about where you want to go with the why of protein, and we'll go to break.
Yeah. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, this process of repair and remodeling, one of the things I'd like people to understand is that if you sort of look at the body, it's in this constant state of turning over tissues. Essentially, the body has to remake every protein in the body 4 times per year. And we think that is basically the aging process. How good do you do that? And the bottom line to how well you do it's a combination of exercise and your diet choices. And those are the two key things. And protein is really central to the diet. So we'll talk about carbohydrate and protein balances and the risk of having too many carbs in the body. We know about diabetes, but it's a very real issue. So those are kind of the things that set it up.
Perfect. Thank you for doing that. That's a good segue. We're going to go to break here. Let me reset this thing. Calling this episode, everybody, Metabolic Transformation. Please mark that down, metabolictransformation.com. Fantastic episode. If you've had any interest in living a healthy life, which I think everybody does, you're going to want to check this one out. Dr. Don Layman is with us. I'm Tom Matt, and this is The Tom Matt Show.
This segment of The Tom Matt Show is brought to you in part by the Source of Light and Power. One record release a month for all of 2023. Sonic Marathon is currently underway by band leader Archibald and broadcaster Mitch Anderson. Hear the sound that is endorsed by Odyssey headphones, linear tube audio, RME converters, and Peluso microphones at sourceoflightandpower.bandcamp.com. This is the Tom Matt Show.
This segment is sponsored by our friends at Ameriprise Financial and Craig Stiles. You are Ameriprise Financial Advisor, our Ameriprise Financial Advisor. Full disclosure, Craig Stiles has all of our retirement zone savings. Thank goodness. I don't want to manage that. Sandy could manage it, but you know what? She's got to help manage this radio program and our careers post what we did. You know, my life at the university, her life in healthcare. So we have Craig Stiles, who is our Ameriprise Financial Advisor, and we hope he's going to be yours as well. Reach out to Craig because with the right financial advisor, life can be brilliant, everybody. Numbers coming at you, 1-800-528-1355. Make sure you drop my name. Please do. You can say Tommy. You can say whatever. All my radio friends know me as Tommy. That's totally fine. Local number, 517-483-4893. The cool thing about Ameriprise is they are a big company, big. And you can reach out to Craig via email as well, craig.stiles@ampf.com. His offices are located 2400 Lake Lansing Road, Suite B is in Brilliant, or B is in Lansing, Michigan, 48912. Again, Craig, full disclosure, has all of our retirement zone savings so that we can continue to find guests like Dr. Don Layman, who's going to be back with us in just a moment here. Stations that have carried us, will carry us, are carrying us. We've got stations all over the place. WGHN 92.1 on the lakeshore of Lake Michigan. First to carry us on broadcast radio years and years ago. It's awesome. WGIM 1240 AM in Lansing, which is the flagship of the Michigan Talk Network, which we are a part of on the weekends. WGRW 1340 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Carried us for a long time. WKLQ 1490 Muskegon Whitehall over there on the lakeshore. WYPV FM 94.5. Mackinac City. See, we got a big reach. We're all over the place. We're up in the Upper Peninsula as well. And then we have our PBS affiliate at my alma mater, AM 870, East Lansing, Michigan, the PBS affiliate for the university. It's so great. I want to thank Craig for building Desideri Analytics, where we are making light of weighted decisions. And lastly, I want to plug the Michigan Talk Network and thank Steve and Ivy Gruber for having the faith to put us on the syndication of the Michigan Talk Network and beyond. Lastly, we have those 4 books on Amazon. Please go check those out, that thing called Amazon, and, check out the Generation Us book wherever you want to go. All right, Dr. Don Layman's with me today. I love making new best friends. I love smart people because you can always continue to learn in life. Learning in life, for me, being a non-traditional student, I love talking to really smart people and having these conversations and being able to at least have a coherent conversation and understand and ask good questions. So I want to ask good questions of our guest today because he is the preeminent protein expert in our country, possibly in the world. Calling this one Metabolic Transformation.com is the website, Metabolic Transformation with Dr. Don Layman. Don, let's start right at the top as we talked about. You started to talk about the why and all of the macros that go into protein and all of your research. Let's just start right at the beginning. We got a good 6 minutes to go in this segment. I want to give you plenty of time to talk about this. We can continue this through, but the why. Why do people need to know more about what you know?
Well, like I said earlier, I think that muscle and brain are the 2 tissues that we have to protect for healthy aging. And early in my career, when I started studying muscle, I realized that it's the one tissue we really have control over. We can control its metabolism because of activity. And I also realized that it makes up 50% of our body protein, and that's a really very expensive part of our diet. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of protein to maintain that. And so, I just sort of narrowed it in on that. I focused on it. And the more I studied it, the more I realized it was really the center of how we metabolize blood sugar. How do we become insulin insensitive? Why do we become diabetic? It's how we metabolize fats. So why do we have high fats in our blood? Muscle is really the center for all of that. And if muscle's not healthy, that's when you start getting these problems, whether it's high blood lipids that lead to heart disease, or high blood sugars that lead to diabetes, or just high calories, too many calories that lead to obesity. So muscle really is the center of really all of our adult health problems that everybody talks about. And people, try to focus on, well, it's about body fat. How do I get rid of fat? Or it's about heart disease. How do I make, my heart healthy? It's not about those things. It's how do you keep the muscle healthy, and then everything else falls into place. So we've really got it backwards. My colleague, you mentioned, Dr. Gabrielle Lyons, says that, one of her comments is usually that, we've got it all wrong. It's not an obesity epidemic. It's an epidemic of being undermuscled, and we just don't have healthy muscles.
Dr. Don Layman's our guest today, everybody. We're calling this episode Metabolic Transformation, Protein and Your Health Span, as we talked about yesterday with Health Span. It's very important to understand that the building of muscle continues to go throughout life. And so as we do these things, you have to embrace this. You have to embrace that weight training is important, that physical fitness is important, activities to promote movement are important, but we've got to really grasp onto this. Don, when I was looking up, and as a trainer, I know that, they're the ratios that they have, the supposed ratios anyways, of your calories with fat, protein, and carbs, because protein is obviously one of the three macronutrients. What people do, they start to manipulate these macros, and things get all out of whack. And again, through your podcast that I listened to, you talked about the carbs and the snacking, and how the snacking was really the culprit. I got a minute and a half to go. Can you kind of finish that thought and talk about that and part of the why with all the snacking that's going on?
Yeah, I mean, to just focus on that part of it, one of the things we've done is look at why people are overeating. And one of the things we know is that Americans are social eaters. We eat because it's breakfast time or lunchtime or dinner time. And for the most part, we're reasonably consistent about that. But the real unknown out there is snacking. And people believe that they should have a mid-morning snack, or they believe at mid-afternoon, or they should sit in front of the TV at night. And a lot of the appetite regulation data shows that it's really this snacking outside of meals that causes the excess calories that leads to obesity. So that's one very serious part of the obesity question. And one of the things by having a higher protein, lower carbohydrate diet is you're less prone to snacking. And so the appetite regulation becomes much better. So that's one of the underpinning part of the whole metabolic transformation that we try to create.
All right, let me reset this thing. Thank you for saying that. It was very concise and very, very spot on. Metabolic transformation, Dr. Don Layman, the preeminent knowledge man of protein, and why we need to understand the relationship in protein as a macro and in building muscle. And when we come back, the next segment, I want to talk muscle-centric, age-related protein synthesis efficiencies, everything that I've been learning from Don and listening to his podcast. And please check out that website, metabolictransformation.com. Sandy immediately went there yesterday, fell in love with it. I went there today. It's great. I've got it up on my other screen here. We talk more about these things, and I guarantee you I will be reaching out to my friend Don to come back to the radio program more often. Again, Dr. Don Layman's here, Metabolic Transformation. This is the Tom Matt Show.
Thank you again to our Segment 2 sponsor, Craig Stiles of Ameriprise Financial. For more information on services provided by Craig, please visit ameripriseadvisors.com/craig.stiles or by calling 517-483-4893. You're tuned in to the Tom Matt Show.
The simplest way to connect with us here at the radio program, everybody, is through social media or our website, tommattshow.com. We put a tremendous amount of energy and time into that website. Please go there. All of our podcasts are there. All of our social media is there. All of this distribution channels for just the audio portion of the podcast, YouTube's there. It's all there. TikTok's there. It's very user-friendly, and it's a simpler page. Please check it out. Facebook, Tom Matt Show, Instagram, Twitter, they're all the same, Tom Matt Show. Our mission is to build a engaged society and team. That's why we have people like a Dr. Don Layman coming on the show to help us live longer and prosper, like Mr. Spock would say. You know, we are all about the 3 C's of community collaboration and cooperation, sharing good stories, education, and entertainment. That's what we do here with this radio program. We do not cut people. We want to help share good information. And there's a lot of good people out there that are doing similar things. Like Dr. Layman turned me on to his friend, Dr. Lyon, and I'll be reaching out to her as well. Already reached out on LinkedIn. And that's the whole thing about connecting with good people, everybody. You want to make sure, because when you reach out to these folks, they want to help. These experts out there, that's what they live for. They live to help us share information. You don't go get a Ph.D. because you want to sit at home and, read books. You get a Ph.D. in nutrition and dietetics and protein synthesis and all this because you want to share knowledge. And that's all there is to it. And believe me, I know, because I've spent 25 years at Michigan State and I've worked with Ph.D.s my whole career. All right, let's get into the muscle-centric, age-related protein. We'll get into some of the macros and the synthesis. I want to give Dr. Layman an opportunity to really talk about this. This is where we start. The rubber starts to hit the road, really, I think, Don. It's really because of the growing older population that we have, and we have more and more people. The boomers are living longer. You and I are both, we're both working out. We're still doing our thing. We're very, very active. And if we can continue to help people get there, you don't have to waste as much money, spend as much money on healthcare if you take care of yourself on the front end. And so please, let's talk about it. Go into that muscle-centric, age-related issue, and however you want to describe this.
Yeah, so let's take a couple of tracks on it. One, I mentioned that I started my research doing some aging research, and for years we've known that as we get older, our rate of protein turnover, our rate of making new protein declines with age, and we always thought that was an inevitable part of aging. But around the turn of the century, around 2000, discoveries in my lab and a couple of other labs, we realized that in older individuals, it really wasn't that they lost the capacity for protein synthesis, it's just that the efficiency went down. And so what we now know is that we always thought about children needing more protein, but it turns out because of this efficiency issue, older adults actually are the ones who need more protein, that the efficiency of handling it goes down, and so our needs for both quantity and quality goes up. And so I think that's a learning for people, is that we've always sort of had the idea, well, I'm an adult, I'm not growing, I really don't need as much. In fact, you probably need more. And so that's a first, piece of information. Another sort of pet peeve of mine is we've always addressed the macronutrients as what should you avoid? It's always been, cholesterol or saturated fat, or those are actually all nonsense. The issue is, how do you balance calories against protein? So when you start thinking about your diet, the first thought you should have is, what level of protein am I going to have? If I'm going to be an athlete and I want a higher protein diet, should I have 150 grams per day or 200 grams per day? Make a decision. If I want to be a vegetarian and I'm only going to eat 65 grams per day, that's a decision. Then the diet and lifestyle have to be built around it. So when I hear people say, well, protein is a percentage of calories, I mean, that's really dumb. I mean, there's no real logic to that. In fact, if it's a percentage of calories, it's inverse. The higher your calorie intake, the lower the percentage. Or to put it differently, if you're a 70-year-old female only eating 1,400 calories per day, your protein probably should be 35% of it, because your protein requirement is the same as it was when you were 25. And so people don't get that.
I think that people get so caught up with these numbers and the manipulation of macros. And you told me yesterday that you've had an interesting career where you've done speaking engagements across the world with some of these the early pioneers of weight loss and dieting. And I don't even like to use the term dieting, but you've been around all these people, and weight loss and muscle loss, they go together in a way. It's interesting, because you told me yesterday, when you lose weight, you typically will lose muscle. And this is not what we want.
In graduate school, I got very interested in some amino acids, part of protein amino acids called branch chain amino acids. And they're really unique because most amino acids are actually metabolized in the liver, but these are only metabolized in muscle. And I kept thinking about why would that be? What's muscle? Why did we evolve to do that? And then, in the 1990s, we had Barry Sears and the Zone Diet, and Bob Atkins and the ketogenic type of diet, and Mike Eads and Protein Power and some of those. And I started thinking about those, and I said, they're all kind of interested in the carbohydrate aspect. I think it's really the protein aspect that's driving this. And so we started studying, and we had been studying these branch chain amino acids. And what we discovered was the amount of those in the meal really regulates muscle protein synthesis in an adult. And so we then started building our diets around the concept, how much of that do we need? And that sort of repositioned how we think about protein and carbs. People said, well, carbs are, the food guide pyramid, if we all can reflect back on it, said don't eat much protein at the top and eat a lot of carbohydrates as grains at the bottom. And that turned out probably was the prescription for epidemic increases in obesity and diabetes. It's just way too many carbs for the human body, unless you're an elite marathon runner, then you can handle it. One of the ways we like to teach carbohydrates is you have a basic need for about 100 grams per day. And every gram beyond that, you have to earn with muscle activity. And that you can earn it at about maybe 60 grams per hour. So the average American is eating around 300 grams of carbohydrate per day. That means the average American needs 3 hours of intense exercise every day, not to become obese, just to burn the carbs that they're eating.
That is an amazing, amazing statement. I mean, that's why we do these shows, everybody. All right, let me reset this thing because we're going to come up on break here. This is greatness. Metabolictransformation.com is where you want to go. I'm calling this show Metabolic Transformation with Dr. Don Layman. We want to talk about health span. We want to talk about the RDA. We want to talk about how many grams per day you should have of protein, all of these types of things. We come back, we'll finish the thread of where we were talking about muscle-centric, age-related protein synthesis, because
if I could interrupt just for a second, on the website for viewers, there's actually a 10-part series on understanding metabolism. So under the pull down buttons under Learn, there's actually a 10-part section there that's really written for the lay public to understand these concepts.
When we come back, I want to do a little more of a deep dive. We're going to pivot off of our notes a little bit, my notes a little bit, and talk about the website and why it's very important for people, because we get so much information in the world. How can we be discerning in what and where we get our good information? This is something we need to discuss. So I'm going to bring that back in, everybody, when we come back, because we're going to go to break here in just a second. Again, Dr. Don Layman's with me. We're going to talk about the Metabolic Transformation website. When we come back, we're going to pivot a little bit because it fits into everything that we're talking about on this high altitude first visit with my new best friend. Talk about the food matrix, but let's find good sources of information. We appreciate you listening to this radio program / podcast, watching, listening, however you want to do this. Again, Metabolic Transformation, Dr. Don Layman. I'm Tom Matt, and this is The Tom Matt Show.
For more information on the Tom Matt RFZ mentality, please visit our brand new website at www.tommattshow.com. Subscribe to our podcast via your favorite podcast platform. Visit our brand new YouTube channel for consistently motivating messaging. This is the Tom Matt Show.
Fourth segment of the Tom Matt Show is sponsored by Brock Fletcher, selling team of Keller Williams Realty. If there was a time in history that you needed to find a really good realtor, real estate company, people to protect your money, again, full disclosure, Brock and the selling team, Mike Dedman included, were our buyer's agent, seller's agent for Big House Holt, Little House Lansing, took good care of us. I mean, when my dad passed away this past summer, helped me. I had to make a phone call because now I've got to take care of this house down in Dearborn, Detroit area. It's like, what do I do here? What do I do here? Brock was the guy I called because I trust Brock so much. Please reach out to him. 517-853-6408 is the office number. The super secret, not so super secret number to his pocket, 517-303-3262. That's his cell phone. Text him, drop him a voicemail. He is very, very good about returning calls. Always. You will get a message if you get his voicemail saying, I will return your call between 3 and 5. He changes those daily. And as a former telecom pro with 25 years at Michigan State, believe me, I appreciate when professionals do these types of things with their voice calls. It's so important to get that information out there. That's why you want to go to the selling team of Keller Williams, kwsellingteam.com, kwsellingteam.com, Brock Fletcher, Mike Dedman, the whole team. And once again, everybody, it's so easy to go to our homepage, TomMattShow.com, the bottom of the homepage where we have the banners. I may even get a banner from my guest today, Dr. Don Layman, for his website because it's so important to get you these good sources of information. I like putting that on our websites. I like having good information. That's what we do. So please help Brock. Go to Craig, Ameriprise, Keller Williams, the selling team of Keller Williams. They help us, and we want them to help you. All right, we're going to pivot a little bit here. We're going to tie it all together because we talk about the food matrix and protein. Dr. Don Layman's here, the preeminent source for protein information. Just wonderful talking to smart people. Let's talk about your website a little bit here, Don. And because it is such a nice website and what you're doing there and you're getting the information out there, please let's share a little more information about that and why people should, bookmark that metabolictransformation.com. Please go right ahead.
So when I was at the University of Illinois and working with the protein, we were focused on, how to be healthy adults. And one of the aspects is, as we get older, we all tend to lose some muscle mass. And we sort of understood some of the mechanisms for that. Unfortunately, to study that, and so that means you have to outlive your subjects. You can't study it long enough. And so we started thinking about other conditions, and weight loss was the one we thought, okay, here's a condition, as you mentioned, if you just go out and do a crash diet, somewhere between 35 and 50% of your weight loss will be muscle mass. It's a huge loss. And that's why people who lose weight will regain it so quickly, is that they're actually deteriorating their long-term body health by doing these yo-yo type diets. And so we said, well, if we correct that with protein in the diet, get the macros right, and use exercise, we did some exercise studies, can we change that? And what we showed is we could take from people who were just following the food guide pyramid, following exactly what the dietary guideline, they were losing 35, 36% of their lean body mass during weight loss. We could drop that down to 6%, which is probably about the minimum you'd ever lose just by doing the right amount of protein and exercise. So that was kind of the issue. And once we had published that, people started asking me, so, well, why haven't you written a book? How can I get this information? And I didn't want to put in the work to do the book. Gabrielle Lyons has now done the book for us. But I said, let's create a website where we can put this information. So that website really was coming out of the research and our clinical research program at the University of Illinois. Is basically what we learned there. The diet that we use is actually there. You can subscribe to it if you want to, but the website has a lot of information, a lot of practical information about what is metabolism, what's good protein, how do you put together a diet. I have an application book there that you can get. One of the problems that we also saw is one of the key meals to correcting diet is breakfast. And people are busy. They get up in the morning and have kids, or they're, running off to work or whatever. And so what we had discovered is that you need to have a higher protein, low carbohydrate breakfast. And that's tricky. People say, well, I don't want to make bacon and eggs and, go to all that work. So what we did was we started experimenting with meal replacements. And so we have developed some various meal replacement type of shakes, and we have one on the website. So we want to have something that people can do that's convenient. They can mix up in a blender and run out the door with and drink on the way to work, or sit at their desk and drink it, or whatever. So that's really the origin of the website. Is we wanted people to have access to what we had learned in our research, and we wanted them to have the practical knowledge of how to put it into their life.
Excellent. Thank you for saying that. It's kind of a segue that we wanted to go back into. There are other parts of this interview that I wanted to touch on. We will not be able to cover it all, but let's do our best here. Don, with meal distribution, how much food, your food matrix, can you kind of set that up? We got a minute to go in this segment, and then we can carry this through in the final segment. And then when we get into the final segment, we can talk about the difference with your plant, animal proteins, and that kind of. There's so much misinformation, disinformation out there, but can you set it up just for the end of this segment, and we'll come back and we'll finish that thread, please?
So the main thing that we've learned that we're trying to get people to accomplish is getting a balance of protein, and particularly what we call refined carbohydrates. And that's things like breads and cereals and rice and potatoes and all of these starchy kind of carbohydrates. So we're trying to get that. So the balance we're trying to create at each meal is we want focus on protein, somewhere between 30 and 50 grams at a meal. We want something with fiber in it, good for your GI tract and satiety. And we want to control the carbs at about a 1-to-1 ratio with the protein. So if you decide you're going to have 45 grams of protein at a meal, then you're going to have about 45 grams of carbs. The average American's eating somewhere between 75 and 100 at each meal. And so that's sort of how we're trying to teach it.
Gotcha. Okay, so when we go with this and we talk about, again, circling back to weight loss and muscle loss and how you need to understand this, everybody, it's very important to do the readings, go to the website, and I'm looking at it right now, metabolictransformation.com. You've got home, you've got Meet Dr. Layman, you got tools, you got learn, you got shop. There's all kinds of good things there. We come back from break here. I want to talk about, again, meal distribution, talk about those morning workouts and how much you want to have, how many grams instead of calories of protein, because that's where I've learned with Dr. Layman that it's not the calories, it's the grams that you really want to focus on. But then also, this discrepancy that we have in the world, everybody, of this plant versus animal. And Don, you want to take 30 seconds to talk about and set that up about the difference between the plant and animal? Could that give you a couple seconds to talk about that?
Sure. And in fact, I just put out a statement on Twitter this morning on that exact topic. But basically, we have this push for a more plant-based diet. There's some risk to that. I think every nutritionist would say, eating more broccoli and green beans is great. But right now, Americans have 70% of their calories coming from plant-based calories now, and it's really crappy. It's basically refined sugars, it's refined grains, it's processed oils and things like that. So what we know for 100% fact is that animal proteins have higher quality than all plant proteins. So if you shift to a more plant-based diet, you have to recognize you're going to eat more total protein, more total calories to be equal. And so that's a real risk for most adults who don't need calories.
And that's where we'll come back to talk about this. Thank you for doing that, Don. Dr. Don Layman is our guest today, everybody. Metabolic Transformation, Protein, and Your Health Span. That's the title of today's episode. Again, go to metabolictransformation.com. Look at what Dr. Layman's been doing out there. This is going to help all of our listeners. It'll help our children. It'll help our grandchildren, and it will help us. If you're training hard and you're doing the work, you've got to fuel yourself efficiently. We'll talk about that when we come back. It's the Tom Matt Show.
Thank you again to our segment 4 sponsor, Brock Fletcher, real estate agent at the selling team with Keller Williams Realty. For more information on services provided by Brock, please call his personal cell phone at 517-303-3262 or by emailing Brock at kwsellingteam.com. This is the Tom Matt Show.
Welcome back to the radio program, everybody. Tom Matt Show. Guest today is Dr. Donald Layman. I call him Don because he's my pal. MetabolicTransformation.com. Calling this show Metabolic Transformation, Protein and Your Health Span. Don, go ahead. This is plug whatever you'd like. Share that information. And I'm going to circle back and talk about how you've educated hundreds and hundreds of students in your 30 plus years at the University of Illinois, but we'll talk about that in a second. But go ahead and do your plug first. Whatever you'd like to share that information with, go right ahead.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have a lot of things to plug, but people can find me on Twitter at Don Layman, and it's all pretty much information. I don't tweet about my vacations or anything else. It's all pretty much nutrition, which I think you'll find useful. We've been talking about the website, Metabolic Transformation. I think it's got a lot of good information. And my close friend and dear colleague is Gabrielle Lyon, which she has basically taken a lot of the things that we have worked on over the years, and she's put it into a book, Forever Strong, which is number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list now, and number 5 on USA Today. So it's a great book. It's embarrassingly dedicated to me, but it's a great book, and I think that it's really written for the lay public to understand these things, which are kind of complicated topics.
Well, I would like to plug Peter Attia's book, because his book is outstanding as well. There are so many good sources of information out there. Don, like we were talking about during break, the hundreds, perhaps even thousands of students that you've helped over the years, the most rewarding thing in life is to have that intrinsic value of knowing that you're just sharing good information with people. And really, you're a pioneer when it comes to this kind of stuff, because as you said earlier in the show, when you first started in your career as an undergrad and grad student, a lot of this information wasn't out there. And just like so many things in science, as we get, more power with our technology and genomics and everything that we can do, everything's shifting and changing. And so I thank you for what you've done in the past and all the students that you've helped.
Yeah, we had some ideas about what would change sort of how we thought about protein and how we thought about adult health. But it took us 15 years to get the methods and the technology that we could actually prove it. So, I think the lay public thinks, well, there's a question, why don't you solve it? Well, sometimes it takes a long time to figure out how to prove an answer. And so to your point, I think one of the most gratifying things in my career is having students come back 5 years, 10 years, 30 years later and say, you changed my life, or, you changed my health, or whatever. And, it's very heartwarming. It really makes the whole process. I think when I got into it, as I said, I started in chemistry, which is kind of esoteric. General public has no clue what that means. But I was able to take my interest in biochemistry and chemistry to nutrition, which everybody has an interest in. So, it was great fun as a kid who grew up on a farm to be able to take really basic science and change people's lives. And that's really gratifying.
Let's jump off from there and talk about the science, the plant versus animal, and all of the research that you've done on this topic. You started to talk about that at the end of the previous segment. And let's expand on that because of the different aspects that go along with this, between the calorie counts and the mis and disinformation, and then all this engineered food that's out there with the snacks. We get inundated, and in the marketing and all of this, and just buy, and all of these carbohydrates that are out there that we overconsume. Please, let's talk about the plant versus animal on the protein side of things and your expertise on that. Could you please expand on that?
Yeah, and we could get into the carbohydrate part too. The plant versus animal for protein, like I said earlier, the animal proteins always have higher quality. When we look at actual protein requirement, protein is simply a food. I like to use the analogy, it's like a vitamin pill. We don't talk about the color and shape or digestibility of the pill. We talk about the 14 vitamins inside of it. And that's really all protein is. Protein is a food delivery system for amino acids. And if we look at our actual requirement, we have an absolute requirement for 9, what we call essential amino acids. There are 20 amino acids in our body, and 9 of them we have to get in the diet on a daily basis. And then we have what we call sort of non-specific amino acids or nitrogen. So those are the two parts. The 9 essential amino acids are kind of hidden in the protein name. And what we know is that in every animal protein, those 9 are in the right balance. They're in the right balance for humans because animals and humans have similar balance. In plants, the amino acids are there, but they're in the balance for the plant. The plant is growing flowers and seeds and roots and stems, which are pretty different than brains and hearts and legs and arms. And so, the plant proteins are there. And the other problem with it is 50% of the amino acids in a plant are bound to the fiber, which we can't digest. And so they're not available. We call it the bioavailability. So plants have 2 strikes. One is that the protein's not very available, and the other is that the amino acids are not in the right ratio. And so we actually have evolved as humans to use animals to correct that ratio. We can get it by eating plants, but you have to eat more calories and more total protein. For example, you can eat, if you're thinking about, say, something like quinoa versus, say, something like a whey protein, a dairy protein, you can stimulate your muscle protein synthesis with 25 grams of whey protein, but it takes, to get the same level of leucine, the critical amino acid, it takes 7.5 cups of quinoa. And so it just physically, you can't eat it. It's, it's the difference between having 300 calories or having 4,000. It's just not a comparison. So the issue with plants is they're great. They tend to be great, beans, nuts, lentils, things like that are great food sources, but there actually should be considered great carbohydrate sources in your diet that actually provide good protein. To just shift your protein all to those plant sources, it's hard to eat enough volume or enough calories to make it work. So that, that's what people need. And I could give you a couple examples. Do you want an example of
this?
Please,
yeah, go ahead. We've got a couple minutes.
What I like all the time is, think about a wheat cereal. A typical wheat cereal will say a serving is a cup, and it'll have about 4 grams of wheat protein in it. Okay. Wheat protein's only about half digested, but we'll go with the 4. You then look at it, says, okay, combine that with 6 ounces of milk. You now have 10 ounces total. And it turns out that is exactly a balanced essential amino acid, a wheat protein with a cow's milk. And now people are saying, well, how about if I use plant-based? So how about if I use soy? Well, now if you look, soy and wheat are deficient in the same amino acids. And so to make that a balanced breakfast, you need to have 25 to 30 ounces of soy milk to balance it. And if you go to almond milk, it's over 50 ounces. So how many mothers out there giving their child a wheat cereal are choosing between 6 ounces of milk or 30 ounces of soy milk as the choice? I mean, that's the kind of practical information the public needs to understand about making plant-based choices.
That is a very good, and getting into helping our children and kids in malnutrition. And we got a minute and a half to go before we got to wrap this thing. So I just need a quick snapshot of this. When I get you back, Don, we can talk about this. But please, you just talked about that. Kids in malnutrition, what can we do for the world to be sustainable?
we know that protein is the most limiting nutrient worldwide. And so early in my career, I did a lot of work in Africa with malnutrition. And it really turned me on to some of these ideas early, because we realized that when a child didn't grow correctly in their first 10 years, they were destined to obesity. They're what we call skinny fat. They don't look particularly overweight, but they have no muscle mass. And so they're over fat. They're destined to issues of heart disease, diabetes. India, for example, is now, I think, number 2 in the world in diabetes. They don't look overweight, but they have no muscle mass. And so it's critical for a child to develop it. And one of the problems, we mentioned earlier about snacking, a lot of these snacks that people are giving their children are very poor food sources. They're high carbohydrate, very low protein. They have no satiety and lots of calories. So long-term risk, we're doing a lot of things in our food supply that really destine us to obesity.
His name is Dr. Donald Layman. His website is metabolictransformation.com. We called this one Protein and Your Health Span. Don, if you had a 30-second takeaway, what would you like to say to the listeners for your first visit with our show?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. If everybody wanted to make one change, increase your protein and reduce your carbohydrates at the first meal of the day when you come out of sleeping, that will change how you feel about yourself. It'll change about your energy per day. It'll help you get your appetite back on track. Get around 35 to 40 grams of protein in that first meal and keep your carbohydrates less than that.
If our show fits your business or group's mission, we want to be of service to you through our guest topics and issues. Please let us know. Go to the contact box, TomMattShow.com. I want to thank my guest and my friend, Dr. Don Layman, for being with us. Check out his website, metabolictransformation.com. Again, always remember, before you can share love with others, you must love yourself first. Get those 35 grams of protein in the morning. Thanks again to Dr. Don Layman, Sandy, Craig, Brock, Samantha. We'll talk to you next weekend, everybody. Have a great week. Go out and ignite your life. Lastly, I'd like to say thank you to Mitch Anderson for producing this show. Tom Matt Show's a production of Boomer's Rock Media. We want to bring your story to life. Thank you so much for joining us. We are out.